Today on Across the Fence, we'll see what you can still grow in the fall garden, what to harvest and how, some different squash types and how to store them for months, and we'll look at some lessons to learn from this year's garden. Hi, I'm Leonard Perry with University of Vermont Extension. On this beautiful late September day, I'm in Richmond, Vermont at the garden of Kathy LaLiberte. Thanks so much, Kathy, for having us back here and hosting us.
Leonard.
So I guess the bad news is you, as well as I, have had a hard, heavy frost.
Yep.
Even the sheets and all the covers we put on really didn't do it.
It's over.
The tomatoes and peppers, but there's still a lot going on in the garden.
That's true.
So we'll talk about. So what have you been harvesting recently?
Well, before the frost, I harvested tomatoes, and I got all of my peppers in.
Oh,
and
good.
those are in the fridge. I have a huge bag of them, and actually, you know, they'll stay good in the fridge for probably 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, so I have a pepper every day. So tomatoes, peppers are done, but there's a lot of other stuff.
Well, you've got, looks like some onions, some shallots
Yeah,
there.
so the other things I harvested actually probably a month ago now, I think we saw it on the last episode, was onions, which are now all dried and trimmed and in the basement, and shallots as well. It was a good year for shallots. Garlic's done, and then I've been harvesting winter squash too.
Now the onions, how do you store those? About what temperature?
Onions like to be stored cold, colder than most people think. Probably, I think, isn't it like 35 to 40 degrees actually?
Like a refrigerator, cold refrigerator.
Yeah, except the refrigerator is usually too moist.
Okay.
Because they need to be dry. So a cool basement's ideal.
Or unheated garage, as long as it doesn't really
shouldn't
freeze.
freeze though. Yep, but it's cooler than you'd think. Yeah.
A lot of things, I think, and we'll look at a couple later like that. But tell us about the winter squash you've harvested. I know I brought some, but you have a couple too.
Yeah, I brought kabuka, I think that's how you say it, which the plants only produce about, like a plant will produce 1 or 2. They're not very productive, but these are really a sweet, delicious squash. And then my main squash crop is butternut. And that I love because it's so versatile. And I probably have 40 butternut squash put away. Yeah.
Well, these are gorgeous ones. And I didn't grow squash this year, but there are plenty of farmers markets and I've been to and picked up a few of these different ones. Of course, you have to have some of the ornamental little mini pumpkins.
Yeah.
Of course, everyone knows the big pumpkins and all the things you can do with those. Some ornamental gourds, which again, we like to decorate with inside in the fall. But as far as the winter squash, and I like those because they're very nutritious, high in potassium, they've got some good vitamins and minerals in them, and about the same calories as potatoes, but very versatile for roasting, so forth. And for instance, here's the acorn, probably very common compared to the butternut, two most common really, and it's obviously from the shape, kind of an acorn shape. What you want to look for in that, if you're getting those or picking them, is a dull green rind. If they go orange, they tend to be a bit tough on the inside and fibrous. The delicata, this one that's very striped and kind of elongated, it's often called a sweet potato squash. It has a consistency like sweet potatoes when you cook it. Similar to summer squash in that the skin is fairly thin, so it's edible, but you really have to be careful that so you don't bruise it, because then it won't really store as well. One that's kind of a hybrid here, and this is the acorn crossed with a smaller version that's kind of yellow, sweet dumpling it's called, and this is carnival squash, a very pretty one with a sweet yellow flesh on the inside. You'd use it as you would an acorn or butternut squash. And then of course the spaghetti squash is this big one here, named because when you cut it open, if anyone's done that and you run your fork through it, you get like spaghetti noodles, which is a good alternative to pasta, very mild flavoring. And then this one, which is kind of interesting, called, for various obvious reasons, a Turk's cap or turban squash. And that's a mild sweet flesh, which is good roasted or in soup. And you can use then the rind for like a tureen if you're making a soup. So a lot of good alternatives here with the winter squash. And as far as storage, again, how do you store your butternuts and winter squash?
Yeah, so butternut, or winter squash in general, likes to be stored around 50 degrees. So warmer, also dry, but often you'll see they say store them under the bed in a back bedroom or something like that. Well, I don't do that, but...
You have a cool bedroom.
Yeah, right. But I do store them in the basement where it's about 50 degrees most of the year. So that seems to work well, and try to use them up by end of February usually. Some types store longer than others. Butternuts are particularly good and long lasting. I don't have as much luck with the kabukas. I think that the The delicatas are pretty short storage
Yeah, I think
time.
with the thinner flesh,
Yeah,
probably
you need
store
to eat 'em
shorter,
up.
like the summer
Yeah.
types. But
So it's good to sort of know which ones last the longest and concentrate on
for the
them.
most part, most have thick rinds, and we've gotten 6 months or
Oh
more,
yeah, for sure.
which is great. You can grow a lot of squash, harvest them, and then really have them all winter and into the spring.
And then you're kind of done with squash for a while.
So yeah, but you're not done with some green things in the garden here. Tell us what all's it's still green in the
yeah,
fall.
the green things are making me happy right now. So I've got a lot of herbs still, sorrel and cilantro and parsley and all that kind of stuff. But I've also got lots of salad greens, mixed greens, red and green lettuce. I've got mizuna, and let's see what else is there. There's a butterhead lettuce, and I have some
Looks like some red
arugula,
romaine
too.
over there, Homo. Is
yep,
it?
that's the butterhead.
Okay.
So there's lots of greens. We're still having a salad every night, and that's because of planting them, in August. They're not the
So
ones I
late-
planted in May.
Okay, yeah.
It's succession planting, so I planted some that are just coming into their prime right now, and that's a real pleasure.
You mentioned the parsley. We just harvested some and are drying them. We have a small dehydrator.
Yeah.
And so we'll have that this winter, dried parsley.
Right.
Now, I see some beets over there. How are those?
Well, you're going to ask me about those, aren't you? So the beets look great from here. I went over there on Sunday and pulled out a few, and there was no beet. There was lots of green. So someone's been eating the beets.
A little vole or mole
yeah,
creature.
Yeah. I mean, they're sweet. They're delicious. I know why they eat them. But they were very tricky about getting them. So I have fewer beets than I thought I'd have.
So you haven't had that issue before then?
Not quite this early or this bad. Often when the nice thing about beets and carrots is you can leave them in the ground until, way into November. And if you get nervous about it being too cold, you can cover them with some fabric. But they'll really stay in the ground. It's the best place to store them. It's nice and cool. So I often don't look at what's going on until later. And yeah.
I know I had a problem last year, which is interesting. I went out, I was about ready to harvest and went out, and then they were all lying on top of the ground. The deer had come through, they'd reached over the fence, eaten the tops and pulled them out and just left the bottoms
So they
on
left
the
the
ground.
bottom, though.
They left the bottoms.
So that's pretty good.
But I see some kale out there, and I brought some kale because I know I've gotten into late in life here, kale chips.
All right.
And I know you make kale
I
chips.
do too,
So here's
yeah.
some kale, just regular, all cut up in pieces. How do you go about making kale chips?
Take some nice tender leaves, take the ribs out. You can pull them with your hand. If you pull the opposite direction, the bottom's here, you just pull like this, comes right off. And then tear them into pieces about the size you have here. Coat them with a little olive oil and some salt and pepper. You can put sesame seeds on them too, and put them in the oven on a cookie sheet at like 250, 275,
Yeah.
something like that. And maybe 12 minutes, and then go in and toss them around a little bit and give them another 12 minutes, and they come out looking like
Yeah, this is what
that.
we made, so my first, I learned early on, you don't go light on the olive oil because it went a little heavy, and a little bit goes a long way.
Yeah,
It's the
you
same
don't
with the
need
salt.
much.
You don't really need much. This is a great place to use some finer salt, whether it's
Sea
these,
salt
but these flavored ones. I know I've talked to a friend, he uses one of these truffle salts, flavored salts, and he said his 5- and 8-year-old sons love these chips. I'm not really a kale fan, but I really like these too. My daughter does too. So I think this is a great alternative, if you want to wean kids off of potato chips.
Yeah.
Try kale chips. Very nutritious too,
And
as
good luck
kale
with
is.
that.
Yeah. So anyway, that's one of the things I love. But you mentioned carrots, and I brought some. I know we talked about these grow bags earlier on, but I wanted to show you what I brought. This nice orange bag, of course, orange carrots
So
go
you
in the
can
orange
remember
bag.
what's in
So I
there,
can
yeah.
remember what's in there, of course, kind of remember from the foliage. And when it starts to die back, even in the garden, I guess, is the time to harvest carrots. But you can leave them, and I know if you leave them later in the fall when it's really cool out, it gets sweeter. But you can harvest them early too. You don't have to wait, if you really want
Whenever
carrots.
you
But
want 'em,
these
yep.
really came out nice
Oh,
here.
good.
These are a new variety for me, Tucson. And I thought these came out really nice. So I'm really
Perfect. That's
eager
a
to get
perfect
this. And I just, because normally you plant in rows, but since this is a round bag, I did round circles. concentric circles, so a couple of them. So I had to figure out how to do that. But I was real pleased how these carrots came out. So if people have poor soil, no chance to rotate, I've got a friend that he's in a community garden. He doesn't know what's been there, and the soil's not really good. If you have a patio, a deck, and live in a condo, have some sun, carrots here would be really good.
Or rodent problems.
Or
like
rodent problems. Yeah, maybe
try
some beets. Look for red bag for the beets. But I also wanted to show this. We talked potatoes earlier. And the way I do potatoes, of course, it's a grow bag as well. I've really had good luck with that. And then to store them cool. I've learned they don't like to be frozen.
Yeah.
Had that problem. I have an shed, which I have just a little space heater. And I used to store and work in, and that keeps it just about right, you know, below 40, but above freezing. Carrots are great. And what I use is a crate like this. It's open. I line it with like one of these frost fabrics here. And just use some of the potting soil. It's a compost and potting soil mixture here, very kind of sandy. And then what I do is just when I've harvested the potatoes, you see here, I just kind of bury them in that. It's just slightly moist, but not too wet, and just kind of push them down in there and then cover them up and then make another layer. And I've had them last till spring in here and just go out and pick a few out.
Well, the other thing is it keeps them dark. It keeps them in the dark, because otherwise they turn green.
Yeah, you don't want, that's a good point. You don't want the light to them. You want them in the dark and just slightly moist. Like I say, the carrot's probably a little moister, but still cool, but not freezing.
Oh, that's great.
So anyway, that's what I do with the potatoes. And then the garlic, wanted to mention too, we had talked about earlier, we have some garlic to plant at home. And here's a bulb, and it has, if you take these outer skin off, you see the cloves inside. You see the little ones here. You want the big ones. You don't want these little ones. So you use those for cooking. And then save these big cloves here. You take those out. And then what we do is plant them in rows about 6 inches apart and about 3 inches in the row. So we have a raised bed. So we like a lot of garlic. And so now fall's the time. Now's the time to plant these. About a month or so, we'll put a nice layer of 6 inches or more straw. Not hay, but weed-free straw on top to protect them from the winter. And then come spring, take that off when you start seeing growth and ready to harvest in July. So pretty simple crop, but now's the time. Again, you want to get seed garlic for that, not garlic that you find at stores. It's different varieties and may have been treated and so forth. So we just love garlic. Again, it's a great crop, very healthy. So we talked earlier about some of the things that are gone, like the tomatoes and peppers, but tell us about the year in general, a wrap up here. How was it?
Well, it's been, the weather's been fabulous. It hasn't been that hot though, which is good for people, but not so good for some of the heat-loving vegetables like tomatoes and peppers and things like that. So, and sweet potatoes actually. I had not a very good sweet potato.
They really like it warm.
Yeah, they like it hot. And we had a frost a couple weeks ago, so that was it for the sweet potatoes. So I didn't bring any out because they're not.
I know our peppers did well. It looks like yours did well too.
Great year for peppers, and the tomatoes were pretty good, although I got late blight on my tomatoes, so I had to pull those out. But I still had a lot of tomatoes, and I have a lot.
Well, you were lucky because I think you got yours in earlier. We got ours in too late in June, and they never really took off. The plants were gorgeous. We had no disease, but they just looked great, and they started producing, but then the frost got them, so we didn't get much. But a good year for cucumbers for us as well.
Cucumbers were amazing.
So that was good. So anyway, well, thank you so much, Kathy, for today and all the visits we've had out here, sharing all your expertise. It's just been wonderful and great working with you. So thanks again. And thank you for watching today on Across the Fence. If you'd like more information on a lot of these topics on vegetables, you can visit my website, perrysperennials.com. For University of Vermont Extension, I'm Leonard Perry.